All right, hello and welcome back to another live stream. Happy Wednesday to all you hobbyist gamers and anyone else who chooses to hang out with us. I appreciate you too, probably not too weird for us. We've got a special guest today, Patty from PaddysParlorGames, yes?
That is correct. I would have tried to continue the alliteration, but I just couldn't make it work.
You just couldn't keep going?
Yeah. Plus, I think Privateer Press has cornered the market on using too many P's in a succession.
Fair enough. So there's that. We've also got Flo in the chat here. Flo, what are you working on tonight?
Working on some Juggernauts, World Eaters.
Are they needed for this weekend's tournament?
No.
Okay. So you can take your time with them.
Yes.
Disembodied voice up in the corner doing his thing.
Yes, I'm actually editing audio while we're just streaming. So yeah, I might be a little bit distracted.
He hasn't really left his office much in the last week. He resorts to editing, sound sweetening, and sleeping on the floor, despite my best wishes. He does what he wants, I guess.
Well, he doesn't have any legs. He's just a floating skull.
He's just a floating skull. He's barely got a brain in there. It's amazing, really.
It's mechanically augmented, thank you.
I'm enhanced. Welcome to everybody in the chat. Thomas Grable, good to have you here. Paul, as always, thank you for being my wonderful moderator, looking out for the chat. Jeremy apparently has to ditch because he has to call the sheriff's office. That's the hard part about dealing with those thieves all the time. Life sucks. Plunderden, good evening. Welcome to the chat. William Innes, welcome. I'm never in on time for this one. Well, you are today. And hello, Shale. All right. And Savage Brewski. Hello. Okay, so Patty, we've got you here because you're a nerd like us. You've attended Valhalla. You're mostly RPG or are you mostly tabletop? What would you say?
Oh man, these days I'm mostly RPG, which is weird for me because that's where I had started before I went hellbent into wargaming for a long time.
A kid, you started in RPGs?
Yeah. My papa taught me how to play Advanced Dungeons and Dragons when I was 10.
Okay.
First edition.
I feel like that's there's only two entryways. One is either RPG or the other one is you bought the board game of BattleTech. It seems like all wargaming came from those two giant gates with very few exceptions.
Nice. Okay, so and then what got you to wargaming then after that? After AD?
So 3.5 had a huge focus on grid elements, and that usually fascinated me. The actual machinations of how things worked in combat, moving your pieces around. Miniatures was a big part of it. I like pushing dollies around on grid paper. And then I remember the first time that I started making terrain out of adding drawn pieces of paper to tissue boxes, and my mom had got me a paper terrain craft kit that was like a barn and the inside of it was exploded, and then there was like an outside you could put on top of it, and then there was like a 3.5 adventure that came with it. So then like all of a sudden I was like, making terrain is really cool. And then I went to the hobby store after getting some babysitting money, and there was a bunch of dudes playing Warhammer. And then I was way too poor to play that back then. But then I joined the army and I had disposable income. Yeah, I joined the army, had disposable income, and then I got super into 40K for maybe a couple of months during 7th edition, and then
Playing
Kitty
what?
and I. What's that?
Playing what in 5th edition? Or 7th?
Dark Angels and Necrons, and I didn't play as much 40K as I built and painted back then.
Sure.
But then, like I said, Kitty and I got into War Machine, and then War Machine was our digs for the better part of a decade.
Yeah. No, War Machine had a very solid hold in the market for a long time. It either collected disaffected Warhammer people or just people who, well, it actually really, really scooped up a lot of Magic players, for better or worse. And it was a fun game. It was considered so brutal. I still remember being at Adepticon one year, going into the 40K hall and being like, "Oh, hey guys, how's it going?" And they're like, "Oh, what do you play?" And I'm like, "Oh, I'm from the War Machine group." And they're like, "Oh, the War Machine group, they're brutal."
Yeah, what they say is like Warhammer is your beer and pretzels, War Machine is vodka and Vicodin. Like,
well, I think that's changed. That's kind of one of the things that seems to be a bit of a. I mean, I don't think you're following much 40K right now, yeah.
No, other than what Jeremy makes me have to listen to, pay attention to. I mean, it's in my wheelhouse. I have to keep up with it tangentially, but usually it's just, oh, look at how 40K is destroying the hobby today. And it's like, okay.
Okay, yeah. So it definitely gets a lot of that, but it's leaned so much more into tournament focus, and that's why you're getting FAQs so frequently. There was just a recent points update that, like, I'm in a tournament Saturday and I already have to redo my list, which admittedly I didn't really do because I wasn't taking this tournament very seriously. But all the same, people who take it seriously probably are very inconvenienced by these things.
Right. Yeah.
So there's that. Yeah. So, balance being a whole thing. Okay. So you design games, I hear.
Yes, that is definitely one of my passions. I love doing it ever since I was in Dungeons and Dragons Club in high school. I loved I remember the first time I was president of Dungeons and Dragons Club, actually.
That's neat.
You're like, I'm a super nerd.
Yeah, I was super duper nerd. Yeah, I was even like coming up with harebrained Ed, Ed, and Eddie type schemes to raise money so we could buy books for the club.
Normal people do a car wash or something.
Right. Yeah, unfortunately I didn't have like the cheerleaders on my side to do car washes, and
I can't imagine.
That's wildly inappropriate.
What do you mean? You mean the D&D club didn't have cheerleaders helping them out?
No.
I don't understand.
As hard as I tried, I just couldn't quite sing. I was friends with plenty of cheerleaders. They could never cross the divide. Their poor high school sensibilities. But I was like super hardcore into Gamma World 7th edition around that time. And I started churning like Las Vegas into my own Gamma Terra thing. So I would like collect maps from the different malls, and then I would like burn them and then edit them and put magic marker all over them, so that way they would look like irradiated mutants were like creating dungeon crawling maps in the malls. And then I would come up with like systems for like how to farm and what different foods would give you what benefits. And then I realized like, man, I might as well just start making my own games. And for the long time I had written a bunch of stuff down, and I would like tool around with it with my friends. But I was like, well, you don't just make games. You have to be hired by Wizards of the Coast in order to make games.
Okay, yeah.
And so,
typical.
yeah, it went like that for a really long time, up until about a year and a half, almost 2 years ago. I was just like, dang it, I'm really going to publish that. And then a little bit before then, you guys were really pivotal in getting this thing made.
Oh, nice.
So that, I mean, it took me a long time to get there, and a lot of that I think came with confidence. But I love playing games, and I think it's just natural that I would love writing them.
Now, when you started writing those games, was it like, to me, I would think if I was to approach one, I'd have sort of like a baseline set of rules. It'd be like, okay, well, this RPG I like, and so I'm going to copy large swaths of it, but then I'm going to change these things because that pisses me off or I hate it.
Right.
Tax about here just suck.
So you want to know what it was? There's actually this game that was on the GameCube. It was made by LucasArts Studios called Gladius, and it was kind of like XCOM, but I didn't know what XCOM was at the time. But for everyone that's familiar with XCOM, it was XCOM, but for like mythical history gladiators. And I really liked the kind of crunch of being able to move your guys around the battlefield. And then there was like some, like strength versus weakness thing, leveling up your characters, an overarching story. And I think that's a lot of the reason why I really enjoy skirmish war games that have like a campaign element, allowing your dudes to level up and take injuries in between, because it really reminds me of that.
Yeah.
But the way that the battle system worked in that game, there was a little bit of like quick time events, which I thought was really cool for a turn-based strategy game to keep you engaged. But their jobs, their careers, and like the stat progression was not class linear. And I remember the first time I tried to make a tabletop role-playing game was kind of emulating what I saw there. So yeah, when you say like using large swaths of this game versus that other game, yeah, I definitely do that. That on top of like D20 exhaustion. I'm so tired of like people saying, "Oh, I made this game," and it's like that's a D20 with 6 stats, and you're like, "Oh, okay, so it's Dungeons and Dragons." But
do you think the D20 system is overly simplified, or is it just overly used? Like, what's the problem with the D20 system necessarily?
Yeah,
I feel like it's easy in one way, just because a D20 is just increments of 5%, and so it's easy to kind of throw those numbers around in your head. And so I think a lot of people lean toward D20 for that reason alone.
Well, and it's very ubiquitous, like Disembodied Voice was saying. It's so widely known. It's what a lot of people identify with. Everybody's got a set of D20s. You could pick up a set of 3 sets of dice from Walmart for like $9. So you can get the whole set of 7 times 3 for $9, and a lot of people are really married to this idea of rolling nat 20s because that feels really good. Inherently there's nothing wrong with a D20 thing. I was just growing tired of it, and being very stubborn that I am, I'm like, D10 supremacy, especially if you get the 20 sided D10 where it's just 0 through 9 twice. I love those dice.
Yeah, well, those are the percentage dice, right? Is what they are.
Yeah,
also
kind of the old ones. I don't think I've got my dice bag nearby, but I mean, I've got one of my old 20-sided D10s, and like the edges are all just rounded. It's practically a ball at this point.
Oh my gosh. Savage Brewski, by the way, adds that a lot of gaming starts from BattleTech. Albuquerque still has a significant BattleTech meta, and one of these days I will play a game. One of these days.
I say, when I go drop off minis on Mondays, there's usually like 2-3 different BattleTech games going.
It's funny because I think the first role-playing game I ever actually bought was Gamma World. I think back in like 1990 or something like that. It was like the box of it.
Play an RPG or a war game until I was an adult. I just literally had no idea that it existed, despite having a super nerdy older brother, but the asshole hid things from me all the time.
Well, that was like Kitty. I remember the first time Kitty watched your channel, she was like, "Wait, girls can play this game?" And she grew up in small town Montana with pretty religious parents. I mean, she didn't even watch Harry Potter until her and I were in her 20s. So yeah, she was just like, "Oh, well, that's way cool. Yeah, show me the minis." And then that's when she saw
was it the Grimkin?
No, that was before. No, she saw the Protector of Menoth, Sisters of the Flame. Ones on
Daughters of the Flame.
Yeah. Yeah, the Flamebringers, I think, is what they were, because they were the ones that the Daughters of the Flame on horseback, because she really wanted.
Yeah.
And then she ended up taking Circle, which is the one that I kind of wanted, other than the Trolls. Like I was in between Circle and the Trolls. So when she took Circle, I was like, okay, well, I'm going with Trolls. And then when Grimkin came out, she was like madly in love with Grimkin.
I feel like you grew into Trolls really well.
Yeah. It's there's something about it. And you're pretty familiar with because we play that IKRPG game. I love it. I love playing as a troll. It's super fun. No,
the IKRPG world gives you a lot of freedom of movement. The old 2D6 system. I know they have the new one. I haven't played it yet. Although I did get a pledge back for the new Strange Light Workshop thing. So I guess I'll get to mess around with that at some point.
Oh, yeah, that'd be super duper cool. I still have the No Quarter magazines that have the Strange Light Workshop stuff in it. And I don't know. I figure if Jeremy ever gets like really tired and just is like, hey guys, I want to play for a little bit, I would probably pick up running Strange Light from what's in the No Quarter stuff.
Nice. By the way, William says that for a few events they did have cosplay girls in Magic who were sort of like cheerleaders.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. They were like a different kind, but much respect to that.
Magic was a huge love of mine for the longest time. As a matter of fact, I remember when I was courting Kitty, she had asked me, I was hanging out with my buddies playing Magic, and she's like, hey, what are you doing? And it was a Friday night. I was at my friend's house drinking beer, playing Magic, and I was like, playing cards. And she's like, playing cards or playing a card game? And I'm like, playing a card game. And she goes, just please tell me it's not Yu-Gi-Oh! And we can at least move on with our relationship. And then she said, and then I was like, oh, well, it's not Yu-Gi-Oh! It's Magic the Gathering. And she's like, I bet you I could destroy your soul. And she did several times. So, but I knew.
What was her deck?
She at that time she was playing the blue-green Simic, because we were in the Return to Ravnica block. And she was brutal. She was very brutal. Yeah, but I knew that her and I were like destined to be together when we mixed our Magic card collection. I was like, there's no clean separation now. So you're stuck with me. Luckily, that paid out.
I'd say so. William also says the part of game design that seems brutal to me is playtesting. Always hated that part of constructed Magic. So
yes.
How do you handle playtesting?
You get over it, primarily. You get somebody that you really trust that can sit down and play the game, because you don't want somebody who's just going to tell you sweet nothings, be like, oh yeah, that game was fun, and then they never want to play it again.
Yeah, but it's fine, crowd.
Right. Mutants being my first published game was not the first game I wrote. I actually have this artifact here that is going on. I have
several of those. I don't see what's this one.
Yeah, several years old. That's got like maps and chicken scratch for a game that I've been calling Evokers. And the first time I played Evokers, it was like an utter failure. And I put just like the whole thing is filled with notes, spells, costs, playtest notes where I was just wargaming on the table by myself. There's a lot of things that you write in your head because you think it sounds good. And then when you put it to the table, you're like, oh, that was a horrible experience. And now I understand why I'm not the guy that's in charge of writing up rules for Necrons. So when you go up to playtesting, you really just I think that's what makes or breaks quite a few people when it comes to making games, because you really got to get over that first hump of praxis versus theory.
Well, okay, yeah, because it can look good on paper and then in practicality not be so amazing. That's lame. Miranda, give me back my 40K flags and stay out of my room. Oh, my brother would lock his door. He's got like I admittedly would try to sneak in and steal stuff, but that's still like not.
Just let me see your heavy metal magazines, bro.
Yeah, I was a horrible little sister. But, we get along now, so it's fine. Yeah, no, playtesting I can definitely see being the trick, especially if you have not yet met, say, the people that will give you good feedback. And it seems like so much success comes down to being able to find a team of people who are willing to like kind of go above and beyond and pull more than, pull their weight plus some and be innovative and learn new things and like want to collaborate with you. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I mean, because you're in kind of a rural area, right?
Yeah. I am in a small town just beneath Canada. Hopefully, though, this time next year I'll be starting up a gaming club for the youth that isn't necessarily into sports and stuff. I've got a community center that I've got really good relationship with, and they were willing to basically rent me out the area for free. And then if it does make any money, so long as I can help with the upkeep costs, so to speak, I would be able to run a gaming club out of there. So hopefully I would like to do it once a month, get my boys down there. Cause of course, my older son, who's going to be 8 soon, he loves playing games. He loves painting his own minis. He's got his own orc army, his own undead, pharaohs for one-page rules. It's mummified undead.
And he does a great job drawing Trollkin.
Yes, he does. He does do a great job drawing Trollkin. I'm going to keep this on my desk for... There's my son's little Trollkin drawing of his character.
When we're not playing, it lives just on the refrigerator, right?
Yeah. No, I got to keep it close to my desk so it doesn't run away, and it's always here for when we're playing.
That's fair. And yeah, and then it's been fun going again back to the IK RPG. I think that's been... I'm sure the new system's fine, but I think I got a way better handle on the old 2D6 system than I ever did proper D&D. So I don't have necessarily that background of, I guess, that so many people have of just knowing how to play D&D and then whatever plugs into it. But it doesn't stop me from being able to pick up games. Like most of the time, people just know the numbers offhand. So you're like, thanks. Tell me more. Although on the D20, doesn't my sound suck, guys? Like I'm being told my sound sucks.
It does sound like
kind of sound echoey now.
Yeah,
it was fine at the beginning, but you.
If you want, I could vamp on this idea of the D20 for a bit while you get it.
Is that Yeti plugged in?
Yes.
Yeah. I see JP got rockets.
It's being recognized.
Wait, now you sound fine. What happened?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, as soon as you said yes, you sounded fine again.
Okay, good. Well, now I've messed up my audio, or my video. Okay, well, I tweaked a couple of things, so yeah, well, one thing at a time. All right. These are still fewer technical difficulties than I ever had in the studio, so whatever. Yeah, so
I wonder if it's a distance thing because you're sounding echoey again.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'll just stay really close and try to talk like a radio show host for now.
Yes, please tell us more.
Just move the mic around. Is it facing the right direction? Is it not backwards?
Yeah, you're the one who came in here and jabbed
If you got the Yeti, make sure that it's like set to this one. It looks like a little upside down heart.
Yeah, the cardioid.
Yeah, and then if it's facing...
Which it's not, actually.
Yeah, that would be it right there.
Why is it not set to that? Oh,
see,
no.
Now your voice sounds great.
Does it?
So let me opine on the D20. There's nothing wrong with the D20. My buddy, the basic expert, makes a game called Atomic Punk that Tommy might be super duper interested in if he started with Gamma World, because it's his love letter to Fallout and kind of Gamma World, but he uses a 2D10 system, which is considerably less swingy than a D20. And I think that's kind of where I'm at, is like after playing Advances of Dragons for the little bit that I did, and then like 2 decades of 3.5 just playing, the D20 OGL stuff, and then getting introduced to all of the different war games that I blame Jeremy for getting me into stuff like Frostgrave and Dead Zone, You know, or Malifaux, which I really wish I could play again, but again, living in a small town kind of precludes me from being able to enjoy. But
I mean, to be fair, I don't get to play either.
Right, I would play with you, Flo. Yeah, I need to do that. I need to get like a really nice army painted up and then bring it down to Valhalla so that way you and I can actually play.
Oh yeah, that'd be super fun.
To be fair, I need to get my army painted up also. I just am really bad at painting my own stuff at this point.
Right. Yeah. And I could talk about commission work here in a second and share in your pain. But yeah, I just, after playing all the different games and then coming back to the D20, I was just like, man, I really just like rolling, you know, kind of like the feeling you get the first time you played Warhammer 40K and you're like, I get to roll how many 6-sided dice? Yeah. That many? I get to roll that many dice and see what happens. It's kind of cool. Do I have a YouTube? I have a Twitter account, and I do have a YouTube, but I am considerably less than 50.
This is your channel on Rumble, right?
Yes. Yeah. Okay. I'll get my Rumble link and I'll share it with you guys too.
Okay.
I should have logged in to StreamYard so that way I could chat, but I don't have the number of subscribers that I need to live stream to YouTube, and you need 50. And that's all I do is live stream because I don't have time to edit. I don't have a disembodied voice to slave away in my office and edit for me. But I do stream every Thursday evening and every Sunday morning, barring fighting immortal swordsmen to keep my head. And I've got the scars to prove that. But yeah, I do mostly on Twitter and Rumble, and then maybe one day if I get enough people on YouTube to live stream, then I'll be doing that a little bit too. But Rumble's my favorite. Rumble's my home. They take good care of me.
It's your jam. Hudson Lane also said I was trying to catch up here.
By the way, you sound considerably better.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
Thanks for all the toxic positivity that made it a crappy sound until now, guys.
No, right.
If there was no chance to like speak up, I was like, should I like scoot over and like type it into the chat here?
Oh my gosh.
But then I have to stop painting. So I didn't get to it. Somebody got to it first.
Hudson Lane says toxic positive feedback is bad in game development at the moment. Look at these AAA game devs making mediocre games.
Mediocre at best.
Yeah, I've been hearing there was that huge one that Sony put like 100 and some million into. I can't remember if it was them or not. And then their server shut down after one day.
Concord.
Yeah.
It was 1 week, wasn't it?
That was a big loss for them.
Yeah, like a complete nightmare.
It's a little bit different because you know, their market is much different. I think they've been resting on their laurels for a really long time. And I think maybe, you know, to bring it back to work like tabletop stuff, you look at companies like WotC who are experiencing extreme market share loss, which if anything, you know, if you were ever inclined to make your own games, your own adventures or supplements, whatever have you, now is a really good time because there are a lot of like really disaffected people who don't want to move to Wizards of the Coast's 100% subscription online model. There's still a lot of pushback with that. On top of, you know, there are some other cultural issues, but we don't have to talk necessarily about those. But the quality of the game is different. You have people these days that that make their bones on consulting on projects that never had the emotional investment that the fans had. So in the case of Concord, I don't think that it was. I don't remember hearing anyone say that it was a subpar game, just that there was nothing that made it great. And then the developers had a very toxic attitude towards the player base that they probably should have went for.
Well, yeah, I mean, you see that in movies constantly. It makes perfect sense with the gaming industry. I think even being a larger industry than the film industry, now.
At this point, yeah.
That you would have, it's basically bloat, like the true artists and the people who really know what they're doing, I think probably get told what to do more than they should when they, instead of being able to just create. It's my speculation on it.
Mhm.
I mean, and part of it's like, bloat from what investors are requiring, or, who knows who the heck is in charge. I mean, a lot of it can be done by like one person, right? Like just making a series of bad decisions. And in fairness, like a AAA title like Space Marine 2 has been a banger. Like it's a fun game.
Oh, dude, I'm really kind of jealous. Like I saw you playing the other day, and I was like, I don't get envy of watching people playing video games, but Space Marine, it activates this. It activates my monkey brain, my monkey brain. I'm just like, I really just want to chop some Xenos up with some chain swords with my bros. That sounds great.
Yeah.
Even I think it looks really fun, and I don't play any games like that, so.
Okay, yeah. Do you think part of that's it being third person for you, Flo?
Yes.
Okay.
Like not even gonna lie.
God, yeah.
I can't stand first person.
Hunting heresy, by the way, Patty might pick your brain at some point on some game design ideas.
Oh yeah, go for it. I remember when New Vegas had come out, I already had like a notebook filled with stuff and things, and I was just like, oh, well, this is great. This is like everything that I wanted out of a role playing game, and I get it. And I didn't have a whole lot of money, so when I was able to buy a game, it was kind of a big deal. And I remember saving up all my shekels so I could buy Fallout New Vegas, and it was like nearly unplayable on launch. I got like the glitch where the head would turn around during character creation, and I was just like, why?
Like an Exorcist head kind of situation.
Yeah, there was a glitch that you would get sometimes where the guy that like pieced your brain back together at the beginning of Fallout New Vegas, where he'd be like talking to you, and he would get stuck in his talking animation, and his head would like turn around, and then you couldn't go anywhere or do anything. So yeah, there was
Amazing.
that, and then there was I had like this really bad frame rate capping issue when I was getting attacked by a bunch of desert bugs, and it crashed my game, and that made me really sad. But yeah, I loved the idea of New Vegas. One of these days I'd love to return to it, but I'm not sure if it works on my Mac. And I don't know if you can get it on the Switch. I don't play video games a whole lot anymore. I used to play a lot, but not
unless it's a Zelda game or like a 40K game, or a farming simulator, I'm probably not gonna play it.
Mm-hmm. There was a question
even I own New Vegas.
There was a question earlier from Robert Oswald that asked me if I prefer to play test with players or other professional game designers. Up until recently, I didn't actually know any other professional game designers, like on a personal level. Of course, I would count Jeremy if he's at all able to listen. I would count him among the amateur professional or the dark professional, as in he's created a bunch of stuff or he's had his hands on a bunch of professional things, but isn't really credited with much. But I'll tell you what, like the audience that I really want to play test with are people who've never played games before.
Right. Because presumably you want to see how they are figuring out your rules, right?
Yes. Being able to hand a set of rules to somebody and saying, hey, can you play this game? And seeing if they read the rules and pick it up and then, can fly with it. That's like an untouched metric, in my opinion, because
it's almost like a basic, I don't know if I'd say basic competency rule, but it's like, have you even written the rules well enough that someone can figure out what you want from them before they start figuring out even if the game is exciting or not? There's like, is this even playable?
Yeah, exactly. So that's a big part of it.
Mac Attack, thank you so much for the super chat. Larian Studios absolutely broke the computer game industry with Baldur's Gate 3, and I am all in for it. I've never played a Baldur's Gate game.
Did you ever play Divinity Original Sin 2? I think that was made by them. No,
like I was huge into video games in like the mid to late 90s into the 2000s, but from about like 2006, 2007 to like 2014, whatever that gap was, I was not in a place to play video games for the most part. So if it
By
came
the
out in that
way-
time frame, I probably missed it.
Well, you
By
picked
the
it
way,
back up.
Silent Hill's doing really well.
Yeah.
Oh, the new one.
Yeah, like a lot of people love it.
Well, so it was around 2014, isn't that whenever you started reviewing games for Media Glitch at that point?
Yeah, somewhere around
So you
there.
got back into it.
Yeah, with my first one being Conan Exiles. What a chonker one to start with too. And it's
God,
funny
it
because
wasn't
after the
that
review,
long
like I
ago?
played a little bit, but after a while, I was like, this game is too weird. Like I don't like caveman simulators. I've learned it's just, I mean, because you can get very advanced, but you have to start by running around naked, pulling like fiber off of bushes to somehow fashion into fabric, which is very anachronistic and not realistic, which makes sense
No.
because realistic would be insane.
No, you have to
Punching
punch
trees.
the fiber. You have to punch the fibers off of trees.
Hold on, guys. I gotta go beat this bush. No, don't say that.
Well, right, and then eventually you're like, oh, now I've built like a whole structure and machines and all of that. I'm like, I want to start over there. I don't want to start in, running around like eating raw meat and getting sick. I just never felt like I could quite get to square two from there without, spending a lot of time. And then that was the other thing. I became really viciously sensitive about where my time got spent. Now I will blow some time. Like whenever I was playing Tears of the Kingdom, I lost all sense of time and space, basically just like on my Switch the whole time, to the point where my watch was like notifying me that my heart rate was unusually low and I should probably move my body.
She's practically comatose. I'm going into the
I
game.
was just like, I need to solve another puzzle. But if the game makes you feel like you're wasting your time or you're spending way too much time accounting and bookkeeping, unless that's your jam, like, oh, I get mad about that. I get really mad about it with movies because if you feel like the story is not progressing and they're just sitting there like, with pointless dialogue that doesn't go anywhere, or some stupid conflict that comes up that's immediately resolved and doesn't mean anything, like those things all piss me off, and video games are definitely no exception.
Yeah, that's part of the I don't know, we were having the discussion about especially Netflix series, but like a lot of television series where you're like, all right, I feel like my time's just being wasted. Like they took it out into the backyard and just set it on fire. Like rather than me enjoying my time. Like what is happening here? And I feel like a lot of games can get in that too.
Why did ASMR come up on here? One person's like, you could do ASMR. And then another one's like, I'll quit watching.
Oh, I think it's because we were doing the microphone, and I was like, okay, everybody, welcome to this edition of NPR with Paddy's Parlor.
So what I'm hearing is it needs to be a separate channel.
Yeah, there's a market for that. Listen to the click clack of my dice in my dice tray.
Or it's ASMR cast.
Right.
Hunting says, so tired of seeing PvP shooter knockoffs fail hard. It's frustrating to see the layoffs the last few years have hit the industry hard. Well, and I wonder, like part of that's people being exhausted. I mean, so question, do you think the gaming market is too saturated? Like, I feel like Steam blew up video games, and online spaces also kind of blew up like war games, at least at the skirmish level. What are your thoughts on that, Patty? Like, it's in a way democratized where a lot of people can now try and do it. The downside is there's a lot of stuff to look at.
Yeah, I think it's wonderful. I've been really fortunate in the year that I've been doing this to meet some really cool guys like DM Blackwall, who's created Horde Wars, or Victor Gorchev, who, I mean, that guy is like the Mr. Modern of role-playing games. The basic expert is wonderful. I know some other creators that are working on some stuff. There's some things that people talk about where it's like, oh, when do you ever actually get time to play all those games? And I don't know. I guess I treat games really differently. The way that I grew up, with my friends groups constantly changing, and then being in the army, and then my player groups coming and going, month by month. I get to play a lot of one shots, and that's afforded me the opportunity to play a lot of different games. And especially when you play, and I know Tommy's probably going to roll his eyes, disembody his head, rolls his eyes so hard they fall out the back of his skull. But those models agnostic games, damn it, you know, when I don't have to buy the models and I could just use models I have to play a different system, I get to play a whole slew of different games that that maybe other people won't try or just haven't because they're like, oh, I don't have models for that. And it's like, I don't know. I think about my my War Machine models, and at this point in my life, my War Machine models have probably more time on the table being played as not War Machine than they have playing War Machine now.
Although I would argue that's more the fault of War Machine than
maybe
the fault of model agnostic games.
Right. Rangers
But
of
no,
Shadow Deep is wonderful.
I support model agnostic games. I remember being excited when Frostgrave was hitting the scene real big. We were introduced to it at Adepticon like years ago, and it's I mean, it's really cool for the players. You know, if you have a lot of models, I think especially like fantasy games do really well there because, I mean, fantasy models have been around for decades and they're just generic. And so you're like, oh, I'm playing a barbarian guy. All right, which one of the 12 barbarian guys do I have that I've painted 30 years ago? You know, like it's like those work really well, and I think they provide a lot of opportunity for players to play. I guess the way I kind of approach it is if you think of it as like in a lot of ways as a game designer. And I mean, if you're trying to like kind of form an intellectual property, then you'll want to, you know what I mean? You just want to start having more proprietary designs and things that are more iconic of your game. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because I mean, like Adam does a lot of model agnostic games, and I think he does very well for them.
Yeah. And Vince Ventrella is not saying that Adam isn't, because he is incredibly clever. But I think Adam will even tell you that he's primarily the art guy who sources the art, does the layout, and is really good at marketing. And Vince Ventrella is like the big time rules cruncher. And that, I mean, you guys want to talk to me about game design, but like everything that I've learned about game design, you know, if it wasn't trial and error and like Jeremy making fun of me and Ray trying to be really supportive, Jeremy's also super supportive, but you know, if it wasn't for listening to like Guerrilla Miniature Games podcasts, when he was talking with like Joseph McCullough, who created Frostgrave, he would do like these live streams where he would talk with the people from the magazine that he was making. So I think he had Joseph McCullough from Frostgrave and Rangers and Mike Hutchison from Gaslands, that they would talk about game design. But listening to Vince Ventrella, you know, sometimes a lot of it comes down to just finding the terms that you could define that. And I think one of the moments was when Vince Ventrella was like, you got to find your core loop. Right? Where do you start at A? How many steps do you take before you find yourself back at A? Once you get that done, you have a game. Everything else from that point is ephemera, and the ephemera is the seasoning. So if you can, you know, have your I guess your cake batter. You know, you can just toss it in the oven and then you'll have like a bland cake, but it's still a cake. And then, you know, to make people want the cake, you add in the ephemera, you know, all the different icings and flavors to bring them on over. So finding the core loop is the most important part. And some people, you know, like I play IKRPG and I love it. And I'm just like, man, you know, I really like the way that they treat health points in D6 Iron Kingdoms. So I'm going to make my own game based off of that. And well, that doesn't get you very far. you need all of the other stuff that, you know, takes you from 0 health points to your max health points and then everywhere in between. And then when you get that, then you can start adding in like, okay, well now the bastard sword does +2 damage versus, you know, a base 1d8 and figuring out all that stuff.
Okay. Hudson also says creative direction is now beholden to shareholders and so many things, not just games. And I suppose that ends up being good for potentially for the independent designer you still have to write a good game, but it means that if you do have a good one, it is not as likely to get stuffed or shelved or modified by other influences, let's say. Speaking to kind of core rule design, I mean, one of the things that Tommy and I have talked about a lot is that the original Mark II rule set for War Machine were probably some of the best rules I ever read in my life as core rules. They all made sense. They were super clear. Like, there was no ambiguity. There was no,
very tight.
Yeah, like, if you can't decide, just roll something and make it up. Like, it always felt so precise. And, the special rules were kind of where things kind of went off the rails. But the core rules were always so wonderful. I felt like I was reading a document written by a lawyer. Like, it was so specific in its language. And I did not realize how uncommon that was, especially when I was trying to learn not the current edition of Malifaux, but the edition before.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It was not the easiest rule book to get through.
Oh, I'd been reading rule books published since the 80s, and I'd never seen anything that solid. Like, I was surprised by it, and I'd been reading rule books and playing games for a long time. And it just, coming across that, it's like, good Lord, these are just so incredibly clear. And the concept is clear. What you should do in any given situation is resolved. It's all there if you just read it. It was kind of, I mean, have you seen anything that's even measured up to that sense in terms of clarity and tightness?
Yeah, this game called Mutants, written by this guy.
Segue.
For as much as people like to give it crap, and I don't have any of the 4th edition books. I just have Gamma World 7th. I still have those books, and those are pretty clear, but they also benefit from being incredibly concise. So it's really easy to make concise rules clear and tight. I think what some people have a problem with, and of course, Mark II, when it was first written, the team was smaller, a lot less moving parts to keep a hold of. And then when they got into Mark III, we're talking like a designing team. So you can only imagine how they broke up that labor. We need somebody to take the throw rules and rework those, and we need somebody to take these. And I think that might have been where they really messed up, is because, earlier when I was talking about Vince Ventrella's idea of the core loop versus the ephemera, you don't have the ephemera write your core loop. That's like saying, I really want to make a cake because I really want something sweet, and then putting a 2-pound bag of batter into what's going to become a 1-pound cake. You can really lose the plot that way when you're like, oh, well, these throw rules have gotten way out of hand. So let's just change the core throw rules instead of changing that army's problem with throwing. I appreciate Hudson Lane there saying that he liked 4E D&D. Yeah, me too. I was in a minority back there. That's when gnomes were monsters. I have a bag of gold for the adventurers.
We're talking about gnomes are still monsters,
right? I tell you what,
they're just little monsters.
I loved the marketing for 4th edition. They had like these PSAs that were really funny, animated.
Those are animations, right?
Yeah.
I remember those. Yeah,
because they made Tiefling a player race, and I was just like, well, I'm sure all the plane chasers or all the planescapers from back in the day are really happy about that. But then they had the little gnome, and he's like, I will know. And I don't know, just the way that he talked.
Harry Potter garden gnome type thing,
Yeah, they're pretty solid. I actually like those animations a lot.
William Inez has a comment in here. What are your thoughts on the old 1-page rule set? Is that inspirational to you, or
I absolutely love the lore for Iron Kingdoms, but I spent a long time reading those rules, and I have some fond memories of being well hungover and with Kitty, like lying in bed just reading like the first third the Iron Kingdom's rule book because it's just all lore.
Mhm.
But when I think about my games, I think so. Like in Mutants, there's 1 page of lore, and it's 3 paragraphs. I think maybe there's 16 sentences in there, and that's really it's really to get the flavor out there. I don't know. So I'm never gonna be Dan Abnett, right? The 40K writer.
Yeah.
I'm never gonna be Mr. Abnett, and I don't have time to be Mr. Abnett as much as I would like to write stories.
The God's Ghost series, like one
Yeah,
of the most famous 40K series of all time. Yeah.
But as far as like going 1-page rules, yes, I'm a huge fan of 1-page rules. As a matter of fact, usually I'm the one in chat bringing up 1-page rules. I really like what they did, and I wish I would have heard of them a little bit sooner because I probably would have like really hopped on like the hardcore making my own game stuff. I think that. I think more people should look into, I think indie games, but it's hard out there. I mean, kind of like what we were talking with Concord. You have people that are super into 40K, and they have been, and they could make the leap into any other game because if you can learn 40K, if you have the time to sit down and read those data sheets, you could hop into any game and probably really excel with it. But there's the financial investment that people have built up. I mean, we're talking like generationally. At this point, there is a grandfather who is gifting his grandson his like 10,000 points of orcs that he's bought over the decades.
Oh yeah,
you know what I mean. So we have like family heirloom armies now. So 1-page rules using a rule set that's really close to the world's most popular game and actively encourages people to use those models is like a really good step to have people, if they're having an abusive relationship with Games Workshop. And not everybody does. Some people have, some people really like, they really like the turn and burn. But I think that's probably one of the best things you could do to try to like show them like, I can show you the world. D6 is all gleaming, there's some really good stuff out there.
Yeah, and that's from being able to play with models that you already have, and honestly, especially with games where they are now retiring models, because we've come into that age, right? War games have been around long enough. So many different models have been created that we are now seeing a significant swaths of models become retired. Now, it's not like they don't exist. It's not like a digital product that vanishes. You still have it. And if you put time and effort into painting it and you did enjoy playing with that model, it would be nice to be able to apply it to some other game. So whether that's an RPG or another type of war game, it seems like that would be ideal.
I feel like you could almost make a tabletop miniature game at this point, basically fighting over the Isle of Misfit Toys, where it's like... where it's like every time a major game system gets rid of, jettisons a pre-existing model, you just write the new rule set for it and include it into this new game. That's literally just a game of like old Infinity models, old GW models, old Privateer models. It's like its own little almost self-aware world where it's an island of, and they all have rules that stay up to date. And even like factions that recognize that the other game IPs exist. And they're just, it's
like a very multiverse.
Yeah, it's like
Nexus kind of world.
Oh yeah, you remember what was that Blizzard game?
Heroes of the Storm.
Heroes of the Storm,
right.
Where they knew that they were pulling characters from like StarCraft and Warcraft and Diablo and all that stuff, and they all seemed to know that's where they were from. You know what I mean? But they were fighting to maintain the Nexus, and so it'd be like fighting to maintain the island. And it's like maybe you have like some sort of agents of the nothing, that are trying to devour the island, and you have to fight them.
Oh my gosh,
that'd be great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mac Attack, for another super chat. Sorry, it took a little while to
Nice.
get to it. Silent Hill 2 snapped my suspenders. I'm assuming you mean suspension of disbelief.
Nope, I think he means suspenders, knowing Mac Attack.
That actually is better. When I found 3 rounds of ammo in a kitchen drawer, so unrealistic. Anyone who owns firearms knows. Depends on what kind of house you're in, but generally generally speaking, I agree. And I have so many thoughts and feelings on Silent Hill 2 and the remake. Although I hear that the remake's been pretty solid, except I do think the combat stuff is a bit of an issue, because if James is running around just waylaying and shooting everything, it makes him a fundamentally different character than what he is in an actual Silent Hill game, especially given the psychological side of it. So I don't think that it should be as combat heavy as it is. That said, I'm not going to play it because I'm a coward with that stuff. I just watch other people play that game because it's my favorite game I've never played.
No, I would say it depends.
I was going to say, I never recommend people mixing their kitchen calibers with like their shower gun calibers. So long as you're keeping the rounds different, you're not, misfiring stuff, you're going to be all right.
I would say it depends. Are you in the kind of house like in New Mexico that makes blue rock candy? Because you might find
probably
all over the place.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. That could be any house.
There's pizza on the roof. My suspension of disbelief.
My suspenders of disbelief.
So William also was speaking a bit too, and I'm sorry I'm behind in the chat here. He is a fan of Joss Whedon's writing from reading Fantasy Battle as a kid. And they were talking about lore in the rule set being told through lore. I think you seem to be more mechanics based, but what are your, how much lore do you find yourself writing?
So I have a Heartbreaker version of War Machine that Jeremy and I have been working on for a long time.
What exactly is a Heartbreaker?
So my heart is broken. I woke up one day and they left me a Dear Patty letter on the fridge that said, "Hey, I know you just got done painting 250 points of trolls, but we're moving on without you, and you're not going to get your troll rules back for another 3 years." And I said, well, you can't just, ransom my trolls back to me like that. So I was spurned on to do that. And I sat down.
As he went and he found a cuter, younger rule set.
No, I
drown his sorrows.
I worked on me. I went to the brain gym and I exercised my mind brain. But you look at the Mark III rules, and I mean, if I may, I got the rule set right here. My gosh, this chonky book. And I believe, I wonder who signed this book.
Aw.
I think you're in there somewhere.
That's from a while ago.
But you look at this book and just going to, oh man, where's like throw rules or something. You would be surprised how much verbiage is in any one of these rules that don't actually pertain to playing the game. What the words do is they serve as a vehicle to tell people what this rule simulates in the game, right? So instead of just saying, oh, your warcaster has 6 focus, and then they can spend focus to use spells. It's like, focus is this mystical energy that warcasters have access to. It gives them the ability to create ground shaking effects. Okay. And you can spend it to buy like reality bending spells, instead of just saying you have this much focus. You can spend focus to buy spells. And JP Got Rockets. I was listening in on one of the first times I was listening in on his streams. I caught the tail end where he's like, Mutants is great because it's not written by a frustrated author. And I was just like, oh, initially I did that because I really want to make my games printable from home, right? The idea is that if you got an HP printer or something at home, you can load up this into like Adobe PDF reader and then print a booklet, staple it yourself, print it.
Do you have one of those long neck staplers?
Yeah, if you've got 6 friends, print out 6 copies of Mutants, right?
There you go.
And give them to your friends so you guys can play. And so for me, I was like, well, let's see. You can almost see like this one, like the pages bleed out of the center there.
Yeah.
And I think this one is like 56 pages all total. So like 60 pages is the max that I will put into a zine. Because it gives you like just enough bleed out of the side to be unsightly without going overboard.
The stapler teeth are only so long; they can only bite through about
right
through about
That's
30
true
pages.
Too. That's true too. So when I design my books, I try to be like really nice on like how much like black that I use, so I don't just eat up toner. And I have to be really aware of how much space is used on stuff that you don't actually use to play the game. So like in this page spread, you get, and even this, I think the margins on this was more of a problem with my printer than it was with my layout. But yeah, you get like 2 sentences of, just something to explain something. And then after that, everything else is just what you need to actually use that rule. And like I said, it's because I'm really self-limiting on that, so that way I can make these books printable from home, and like I said, easy to print and stuff in someone's stocking if you want. And that's probably one of the things that I need to do is I need to put language in these that say you can print. If you bought it, print it. If you didn't buy it, I don't know, you probably got it as a free giveaway on my channel. Print it.
But hopefully you play it.
Yeah, hopefully you play it. That is the idea.
Jeff asks, what games are you using your War Machine minis in?
Oh, what games don't I use my War Machine minis in? If it's not sci-fi, if it's not a sci-fi game, I'm probably using my War Machine minis in it. And I actually, a lot of my, if you guys are...
Wait, are you saying if it's not a sci-fi, then you'll use them?
Yeah, so
I guess you have warjacks. Are you just all hordes?
Any fantasy game, I'll use my War Machine, well, my hordes minis, where I think they dropped hordes from War Machine.
They did from the branding. Yeah.
But when you bought yours, they were hordes. So
that is correct.
They're hordes.
So unfortunately my warjacks don't get a whole lot of use, which is why I really wanted to write the Heartbreaker.
Yeah, because it felt like warjacks would go great in sci-fi games.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, especially the Warcaster ones. The Warcaster ones are really cool. That I was making a really long roundabout, but I was able to turn the core rules that make up War Machine Mark III into a weird 2.5, and it only took 5 pages.
Oh wow, 5 pages.
Yeah. So now I just need to write army lists for it, and I can actually play test it.
So that's his new website. Go to 5page rules.
Right.
.com.
Hudson also points out, now we don't own games, we get to purchase a license to play, and that's going to thin out the industry. So I know that's a big problem with digital media for movies, obviously streaming services, Steam games, they're all licensed. Anything you're downloading is pretty much all licensed. The thing about tabletop, though, I feel like it never gets too far from analog. And I mean, I personally get a little annoyed whenever I have to start resorting to my phone to track points, for example, in a game, or if that's the only way to see how my game is going along. Like, I don't want electronics in my super analog game, because I think that encourages an extra degree of complication. And I have an example of that. So we have to keep track of tournament games through Best Coast pairings, and you'll add up all of your points and all of that, and use Tabletop Battles as another app. So you're already using 2 apps for your tournament play, even if it's casual game or casual tournament, I should say. And in there, you're now getting up to 100 points in a game for one game of 2,000 points or whatever, instead of something you could just keep track of in your head, or maybe stack cards to the side and count them up at the end. It's got to be tracked in this like other way, because now you're counting things that happen from turn to turn, and you've got to add up those points, and whether or not you had more points than the other guy will also change that. and they added all these extra levels of accounting to your basic turn that I think slows things down, but also again invites like, at what point are we going to now have to use apps and more digital devices for our analog game? And which point does that become like, why not just play a video game again?
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, I think it's one of the things that I absolutely loved whenever I stumbled into War Machine was that everything was just sort of tracked on a card. You just took a card, threw it in a sleeve, and then you had a dry erase marker, and you just, your damage boxes were just brilliant. They're like, oh, they're just right there. And wait, how many hit points do you have? And you just look across the table at your opponent's card, and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, I got like 8 more hits I got to do on this guy. You can just see it at a glance. I think even some of the tournaments, the objectives started having cards. Where you go and you have to destroy an objective. Like it had a card sitting on the side of the table, and you're just like, this is great. Like, what a well-made system.
Well, the problem with that was, and I love it too. What I was showing off there was this is 3rd edition Malifaux stat card, and the health is at the bottom. It's tarot size, so they were able to up the amount of rules. And up the font size so they read more clearly. So I really enjoy that. I think the only problem is it
easy to find card sleeves for that size?
Yeah, I have card sleeves for them.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Well, and tarot cards are so on brand for Malifaux. Like, what an excellent aesthetic choice.
Oh, for sure.
I really want to get back into Malifaux. It's really just a question of pricing me out at this point, unless I keep winning these giveaways.
So I mean, maybe I'll kind of present that a little bit, because you're talking about the core loop, right? And then you're talking about the icing, whereas I kind of submit that Malifaux kind of went the other direction, and I think to great effect. Because one of the things I really loved about the card flipping system and all that stuff with Malifaux is, more than anything, I mean, it's a little bit clunky, it's a little bit whatever, right? And they can work on streamlining it, which I'm sure they have over the years. But one of the things I absolutely loved was just, you kind of felt like, you're in the world of Malifaux, where your chief playing system is like you're playing poker at the table. Yeah. It felt like you're kind of playing almost what would you call it? Like pretending you're a part of the world or something. And so like the actual design of the game, it almost seems like the aesthetic of that came first before they then decided how they were going to design the use of the cards, which I don't know. I think that ended up being a very effective approach for Malifaux specifically.
Well, yes. But they still need, it's almost like picking your faction when you get into a tabletop war game. It's like everyone tells you to go for the looks immediately. So that like first is what gives you inspiration to maybe pick a box off the shelf,
which I agree with, by the way.
And then eventually you start learning the rules, and then like kind of bringing it back to Mrs. Parlor, when she picked up the Circle of Ouroboros, she was like super thrilled, because she was like, oh yeah, this one's got like all the monsters in it, and I could paint all of the furs, and she really wanted to do all the blending on the furs. But then she really just didn't like the movement shenanigans. You know what I mean? So even though she was a big fan of the models, she didn't actually like playing them unless she was like running Goraxes, or she was running, I think the Pureblood Warp Wolf was really good at melee stuff without having to resort to too much like slingshotting back and forth. And then eventually she got into Legion, and then into Grimkin, which was kind of like depending on what you wanted to play, you could play that in Grimkin.
Grimkin was probably one of the most fun factions they ever made. Like, even if your list was garbage, you were always having fun playing. It was just, you could always just try some weird thing. And it was, and I don't know, it was great. It was they were excellent. They were really refreshing to play from like the more militant Khador.
You do have a super from Savage Brewski there.
I would argue that that's where they fell down. Is, in all honesty, whenever you're actually playing, so an army should look like what it does. Do you understand? So like when you play Khador, you're like, oh my God, Khador's cool. It's like, well, you have the big stompy robots. You got, I mean, and they're the biggest ones, right? The ones that you assume can just get wailed on forever and they're okay, you know, and they hit real hard. Maybe they don't have good precision. Maybe they're not fast, but they'll definitely make it to the other side of the table. Well,
they are literally the side of a barn.
Right. And it's like, when you see that faction, that's what you expect. Well, every rule that faction does should really make sure that that's correct. And I felt like, you know, like with Circle or with some of the others, they didn't quite do it. Even with Kador a little bit, you know, what were your Winter Guard were like the slipperiest, hardest to hit.
Oh yeah, it made no sense. The Winter Guard Death Star. Because you had Sack Pawn, you had Bob and Weave that gave plus defense. You could put concealment on them.
Well, no, it was Bob and Weave plus what was it, Iron Flesh? That somehow didn't make them tougher. It made them harder to hit. Yeah. And so you had these guys that had a defense that was so high, you just couldn't hit them. And you're like, so these guys are ninjas, right? And you're like, no. They're just foot soldiers. And you're like,
they're like conscripts nearly.
Right. And it's like, well, that's where the rules fell down. They did not, the concept of the unit was like, hey, you know, like you just said, they're conscripts, but like they're just a step above conscripts, right? Mm-hmm. And you're like, oh, okay, well, so they're just going to be a lot of them, right? I feel like Imperial Guard largely gets this, you know, in 40K, but in War Machine, they were kind of like some of the most elite things you could put on the table that when people saw them, they're like, crap, how do we handle these guys? And it's like, that's where the rules, that had a design loop and they're really good, but when you bought that faction, that's not what you bought it for. And so the rules let you down, not the faction. And that's why I say whenever you go into a game, you should walk up and go, all right, which one of these factions just sings to my heart? You know what I mean? Like, oh my God, this is a faction full of werewolves and like druids and stuff like that. Well, then they should play like that. They should play exactly the way you think they should, because that's why you made those miniatures that way, right? That's why you painted them that way. That's why. And so when the rules just got wonky because you could stack special rules in a way that the designers hadn't considered when they wrote it, well, then the rules are what let you down. And in my opinion, that's where that falls down. And so like, I mean, Kitty should have been like, oh my gosh, where like I have the wolves, they have the pelts, I have these cool druid people, even the stone men, like the cool stone constructs. I was like,
the wolves. Yeah, the wolves are pretty cool.
Well, it's like some of those should be like Kador Warjacks. Just how do you beat up a rock? You know, it's just a stone, you know, like
bigger rocks.
Right. And so it's like, in my mind, it's like, oh yeah, well, those guys, and it's like you'd put them on the table and they just evaporate. And you're like, oh, well, that's not what I was expecting.
Savage Brewski with a super chat. One of my major gripes with newer editions of 40K is the need for the app to formulate army rules and lists. It was best with a codex and a pencil.
100% Savage Brewski.
So let me ask this question then, because back in the day, earlier White Dwarf issues, we've looked at old White Dwarf issues that Disembodied Voice had, and where they had the little thicker cardstock paper in there where you could punch it out and put together an orc vehicle, like a Brain Smasher, and there are like two others, right? There was an issue of White Dwarf where you could make your own Bane Blade, because all they wanted you to do is just have fun playing this kind of ridiculous game, very much beer and pretzels. But the question becomes, with a degree of popularity, what threshold is there? A threshold, I suppose, where it becomes so popular that it starts to become too institutionalized. It needs to be organized with apps, and there needs to be more rules, churns, and retiring of models, because now it's not casual anymore. Do you think that is required, that change is required for it to be a popular game?
It's one of the things that I think about frequently, only because you think about what Snarling Badgers, which is Vince and Uncle Adam, they went into the game design business knowing full well that they were going to release maybe a game a year, and that was it. And I was thinking about the same thing. I love mutants. I love playing mutants, and I want to write a bunch more stuff for mutants. You know, the idea was ideally to come out with a mutants zine twice a year minimum. But there does get to a point where you bloat too much, and you look at what Steamforged Games did with Guild Ball. I probably should have looked that up a little bit more before I started talking about this, but they got to the point where they said we've reached peak Guild Ball.
Mhm.
If we keep coming out with more stuff, the only thing we're going to do is make people upset that this new hotness cooled down the old hotness. And so with that being said, we're going to retire the game. And I think that's a very admirable move, because you're not invalidating somebody's purchase, which is a turn of phrase that we've threw around a lot when Malifaux 3rd edition came around and said, oh yeah, in the lore we killed off all of these people. And then
So what was the phrase again? You've invalidated what?
Invalidating my purchases.
Oh, okay.
Right. I've invested in the game. The whole reason why you're able to come out with a 4th edition of War Machine is because I spent thousands of dollars in War Machine Mark III. You know what I mean? That's kind of the idea. And when you do a new edition, we all know that when you do a new edition, it's primarily to get new people into play, right?
Yeah.
So people, there's a big feel bad moment. And like I said, that's one of the reasons why when I look at what Snarling Badger is doing, and I'm like, I really appreciate that, because you're not having people like consume product, be happy, get sad, and then consume product and never ask questions. For one, being as busy as I am all the freaking time, I don't have the time to keep up with the War Machine rules like I used to, and I love to. I mean, like Tommy was saying earlier, I read rule books. Some people read Harry Potter, or I think Kitty was reading I don't know. She calls it very intimate relationship book time. It's ACOTAR, I think is what it's
we
called.
all know what they're talking about. Though.
Yeah. I think it's called ACOTAR. I don't know.
Miranda reads 1,000-page books on the life of Stalin.
Yeah, we have different jams. It's fine.
So, but that's what I do. I love reading rules books, and I certainly like writing them too. But I don't have time to keep up with the constant turn and burn when the War Machine, I can't remember what they even called it now, but I used to keep up with it like it was breaking news. Was the War Machine CID? Yeah.
Oh my gosh! When the CID came out, I was like, "Get bent! I'm out." No.
Yeah.
At first I was like, that all the tournament players got into get their wish list fulfilled. No, it was.
Yeah, dude, I was. And that brings me back is like, I always tell people, if you think you got a really good idea, you should put that down and share it with all of us, because you never know if you're going to come up with the next Warhammer 40K unless you share it.
So let me push back on that a little bit. Jeremy, I think I agree with Jeremy here. And you're talking about the reason for a new edition. You said earlier was, in order to bring in new players.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is that, I guess I'm probably the oldest person on here, but I come from kind of an older world of gaming, right? I was in game stores in the early 90s, like knocking around, looking at those things. And the culture of gaming was different in that way. The idea of a new edition was so that you could clean up all the old rules that after years of play, people are like, yeah, these don't work. And you're like, right. So we're going to make this better. It's basically all right, it's been out long enough. We got it. We understand the problems. Here's the new edition. We've solved it, and hopefully we haven't introduced too many new rules that are not playable or broken or whatever.
But it was super infrequent, right?
It was not very frequent. And the idea was that it was just a fix is all it was. We were just fixing the rules. Don't worry. Like clearly all your old stuff is going to be still there. Like they didn't retire models. I mean, how long was 40K out before they retired even a single model?
I mean, that's only happened in the last 10 years, maybe longer. I don't think. Much longer.
Yeah, and well, a little bit longer than that, but the idea was that, I mean, God, for decades, you could be like, hey, I have a Space Marine army. All right, well, I went into the army. 8 years later, you come out. Hey, I'm going to dust off my Space Marines, go to the game store. You get in a game. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's that, right? You just buy a new codex, and your Space Marines are all, they still have bolt guns. That guy's still got a heavy flamer. You know, that guy, that's still a Rhino. Like, you could just still play the game and it's fine. And then probably you just pick up your, go ahead and buy new things now. But they would still go with the stuff you already owned. And it's a different culture. And I think it's a different expectation that gamers have currently in the hobby, is that you kind of expect there to be a churn where there kind of shouldn't be. Like, I feel like we've gotten used to something we should not have gotten used to. You know,
it's the new normal.
Well, and it's the what is it? Oh gosh, the longest running GW game that's perfect and they haven't touched. Mordheim. Thank you, Mordheim. There's people who play Mordheim still. You'll go to conventions. There's still Mordheim campaigns.
That's true.
Still people that play Chainmail and Advanced Dungeons and Dragons First Edition like exclusively. They say it's the perfect game. Why would you ever need to play anything else?
Well, and it's like the idea is that, and I've always held to, and I still have yet to see anything that proves it wrong, is that wargamers are consumers by nature. You don't have to convince them to buy new miniatures. They will just buy them.
Yeah.
Well, and I think they dislike being forced to buy them when they would happily do it of their own volition, which is where Mark III into Mark IV became this real pain point for Privateer, now Steamforge, of, okay, well, these models, you can kind of use them over here, but really we need you to buy all these new ones because we have a company to run. And I mean, a consumer doesn't have to care about, what you need to do for your bottom line. Like, you're supposed to sort of make that work and make the consumer want to go along with that, not guilt them into it.
Well, yeah, as a company, your job is to create things that customers want to buy. And especially in the world of 3D printable models right now, what you really need to be providing is a culture of your game. You know what I mean? Like, what you need to be providing is the idea of, hey, we have a rule set, we have an intellectual property, we have all these things that we've established, and we've worked hard to make sure that there's events going on at a game store near you. And that's why you're buying into our game.
Yeah.
Because if otherwise, just print whatever miniatures you want, do whatever you want. If we're not guaranteeing you that there's a cohesive world, it's almost, and I've always been for years, I've been fascinated with MMORPGs, because I've always loved the idea that server is running even when you're asleep, even when you walk away from the game for 6 months and come back, that server's been going. And that's the same, like, it's one of the biggest reasons Warhammer 40K is because, even while you got mad, walked away, or sold your stuff, or just had a kid and didn't have time and came back or whatever, that game's been going on. And when you come back to it, it's what you left. That game's still there. And it's, you see a lot of comments of people who are like, oh, how many times has someone walked away from 40K, but they always come back? And it's like, well, it's because it's always there for you. That's why.
It's consistent. Savage Brewski's point, I definitely agree with. I do think if you have a good game out the gate, it's amazing. And BattleTech has largely been a testament to that too. I mean, it has not had many changes in its run. And I don't think it's tried to be GW. It hasn't come in trying to be crazy, a huge game. It's just tried to be what it is. And it appreciates its audience. I 100% agree. I wish all companies took that, because now we have things like DLC, FAQ updates that are digital, that have encouraged developers to become very sloppy, and also made it harder on developers to meet deadlines, because now the deadlines are shorter, because you can just DLC it or FAQ it later. Which codex was it?
Maybe
the last
video
one?
games
Cow
are to
Codex,
blame.
I think, came out like a day later. There was an FAQ already for it.
Yeah.
Maybe video games are to blame for that, because
I think video games set a standard. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, like an expectation for a player base. Because as soon as DLC became a thing, they no longer cared about shipping a functioning video game. And I wonder if
New Vegas,
right? Well, I wonder if tabletop games and role playing games are starting to fall into the same problems.
Yeah, I mean, I can see that. I can see a lot of the same administrators coming from one company to another as a game company maybe develops. They're like, oh, we have to hire someone on. They come maybe from a video game background. They're like, oh, we do this and we do this. And, you have to create this kind of calendar of events and turn this around.
Well, that's what, so you were talking earlier about like the popularity of it all. I mean, especially as we move to stuff that's more digital. So Kathy Williams used to be a head of design or something of that matter for Microsoft, especially in its Xbox division. And then she ended up becoming the CEO of Wizards of the Coast. Right. So now we're seeing this move for Wizards of the Coast to go more digital. I think when it came to this last book that they just released, they've had almost, like, in comparison to how many people talk about playing Dungeons and Dragons to how many people bought the new rule book, it was insanely different. And that is because they are moving to a digital platform. I mean, they published the Player's Handbook, the 2024 Player's Handbook, without a blank working character sheet. The only character sheet you could find is in the book, and it's got like number dots on it that tell you what section of each character sheet is meant for. You know what I mean? Like, how do you come out? And for older guys like us, we could probably sit down and be like, oh, okay, I got a piece of paper, I can make a character sheet. But there's a lot of times in my life, is like being in Dungeons and Dragons Club and teaching soldiers how to play, where their culture is watching people play online. So they sit down at the table with this idea of what it's like to play. And it's like, well, that's their game. That's not necessarily, the game. And I sometimes catch flack because I like to play rules as written. And a lot of that probably has to come with war games, because you don't just house rule war games, especially not War Machine. You don't just house rule War Machine. You know what I mean? Get out of my house if you're going to house rule War Machine.
If there's an infernal ruling, if there's confusion.
So that's one of the really funny things about making my way back into role-playing games, where I've always wanted to play rules as written back then. Then I played tabletop war games where house ruling is just unheard of. And then getting back into it, mind you, I didn't really talk online with a lot of people that played role-playing games. And I was really kind of culture shocked, where people were like, you like playing raw? Gross. That's not how Gary Gygax played. I'm like, I mean, okay. I mean, you can play however which way you play, but I raw playing rules as written is like the best way to have a shared experience. That's why I'm able to go to the game store with Space Marines and be able to play a game.
Well,
as opposed to what?
Town.
Well, as opposed to what, right? Like spirit of the game versus rules of written?
Rules as intended versus rules as written, or homebrew, as what role-playing game people
So homebrew, I think, is fine. But I think whenever you're playing rules as written and it somehow doesn't line up with rules as intended, that's the rules writer that got that wrong.
That is 100%. You should have said what you meant and meant what you said, or what you wrote.
And been clear about it, yeah. And that's where you usually saw the special rules get sloppier than the core rules. Core rules, I think, generally stayed pretty solid. Savage Brewski pointed out that on the Leagues of Votan, or Leagues of Votan? Votan, they had a day one FAQ. And
I think that they just all do now, don't they? Like, it seems like
I'm sure my guard, basically, when they do, it'll be like no point in having the book. Thank you, Hunting Heresy, for the super chat. Super appreciate that. GW's treatment of Deathwatch was a mess. They deleted Deathwatch as an army after saying they'd be featured. Now they're backpedaling after featuring Titus's service in Deathwatch and Space Marine 2. That's right, because he served 100 years in the Deathwatch. Oh, see?
Companies are doing that so much now. Marvel did that. Right at the height of Marvel, whenever like Iron Man, Thor, Captain America, and why am I blanking the other one? But like whenever they were at the height of their success, the Marvel comics weren't making Thor comic books. They weren't making Iron Man comic books. They weren't making Cap.
Oh, that's right.
comic
They were
books.
doing like the alternates, like
Yeah.
Ironheart and
Yeah, Hulk
like,
was the other one I was thinking of, because they
Hulk,
didn't even
okay.
have the same Hulk. So whenever, a bunch of parents are taking their kids to the comic store because kids are super excited, it's just like, oh, all right, I want to get the Iron Man comic book. And they're like, well, we have Ironheart. And it's like, what are you doing? And it seems like GW did the same. Well, it kind of feels like they did the same thing even with Total War, right? It seems like Warhammer Total War came out right as they killed Warhammer Fantasy Battle and brought Age of Sigmar in. And I think there's a lot of people, they're like, oh, wow, this is cool. Do you have these? And they're like, yeah, we don't, that's not a thing we sell anymore. It's like, man, how many dollars do they leave on the table just because they refuse to just keep carrying the thing that they're now sort of promoting through other
means.
fields of media.
So devil's advocate in a way, not really devil's advocate, but more of an explainer, most likely being someone who works a lot of time in the corporate world. Don't be surprised at how few departments actually talk to each other. The licensing department had nothing to do with any of the development part.
Yeah.
And they just licensed the game out. Space Marine 2 is being developed by, that company. Can't even remember their name right now. But they developed it and decided. Dark Tide did the same thing with all of their chaos. They have no clue, like, this game is so crazily well anticipated. They're all in their own bubbles.
Well, so yes and no. I mean, that is what a CEO is supposed to be there for, though, right? Isn't
Yeah,
that the guy who's like running the Exxon Valdez into the shore?
Well, like, that's why I say it's not really an excuse. It's just, I think that's what's happening. And GW is very big. They have over 3,000 employees was the number I last heard. And so that's a lot of people to coordinate. I mean, you try getting 10 people to figure out where to eat. You've already got like a nightmare, right? Like imagine organizing 3,000 people.
But as the CEO, you're supposed to say, oh, I want to eat here. All of you are meeting me there because I'm paying you, and it's like, and it's not like the CEO is running all 3,000 employees. Like he's just running the heads of departments. And so he should be telling the guy who's like, hey, we're the licensing department is like, yeah, we're actually licensing to Creative Assembly. They have this very popular series of games that the next one is ours. And you're like, oh, really? So they're doing Age of Sigmar? It's like, no. It's like, oh, because everyone else is doing Age of Sigmar. Why are we licensing this other thing? Like he's supposed to be on top of that. Like I don't, that guy doesn't get any passes from me. He's certainly paid well enough to be paying attention to everything.
But what is the company culture? So William points out like communication might be discouraged between departments in some areas. If you have employees that might be only paid so much, there might be a risk of leaks, for example, or, giving an employee too much knowledge where they then go compete somewhere else. I think there are
maybe more paranoid reasons. Fine. But again, the CEO should know what every department is doing. Just because one department head doesn't know what another department's doing, that can be fine. But if the guy running the guy at the helm, if that guy doesn't know what all the different departments of his ship are doing, that guy is, he's incompetent. Like that guy should not be where he is, and just there's no excuse for it. That's, I mean, I guess it's just sort of long and the short of that is that if you have somebody who is at the head of the company, the buck does stop somewhere. And that's so it should be with him.
Yeah, no, that's true. Well, we're getting about time to the end of the game. I'm so sorry I did not get to more of the chat, guys. I really appreciate all the thoughtful conversation in here. But one of the things I've forgotten to ask Patty is, where do people find your game?
Yes, so you can find some of it over at Drive-Thru RPG. We were talking a little bit about this before we started. I do a lot of gonzo horror adventures. And I've got some stuff that Drive-Thru RPG will not publish. They will not do it. Gosh darn it, they've decided. So instead, I've become really good friends with this guy that runs a website called GiantSlayerGames.com. He publishes everything I write, no matter how grotesque it is. So I'm extremely grateful for that. Plus, it lets me do like a discount code. So if you buy my stuff through Giant Slayer Games and you use the code Parlor Peeps, where Parlor is capitalized, Peep is capitalized, you get a 25% coupon right off the get. And that's just because Drive-Thru takes 35% of each of my sales, and Giant Slayer only takes 15% of my sales. So you get my stuff at a much bigger discount if you go through Giant Slayer Games. Right now, I was really excited to work on a project. If you guys like spicier things, I've been working on this project with some really lovely people for about a year called The Deck of Many Triggers. It is a deluxe card product in tarot form that is supposed to be a parody of the Deck of Many Things, and it's headed off by a lovely Irish gentleman that goes by the name of Neckbeardia. Seek him out at your own peril.
Oh no!
But he's a wonderful lad, and I've got to work with some really cool people on that. So we've got that working. I've got another book. I recently suffered a really bad hand injury, so I'm really far behind on doing my own art. That's the other thing. I do my own writing, layout, and art. Jeremy and I have a really good friend by the name of Sonicus Maximus, who does my editing. But my hand's been injured, so I haven't been able to draw. So I am working on a Shadow Dark adventure that's set in the modern era, using my friend Victor Gorchev's Blacklight hack of Shadow Dark. So I'm really close to finishing that one up before I send it off to my editors and then get it back. And I was able to put that one together without doing any drawing. So I'm sitting like at my desk with like my right hand in a heating pad cocoon while I'm like typing with my left hand.
Oh my goodness.
I have to create. I think that was one of the questions that you wanted to get to. And if we have time, I don't mind hanging out for as long as you want, but
well, I did want to address some of the questions in the chat too, because I know Jerry was asking about solo RPG rules. Now, I've never played a solo RPG. I know there's rules for like solo war games. Like
the closest I've done was Advanced Hero Quest. I remember they had solo play rules, so you lay tiles out, and it's sort of an RPG, but not quite. But as far as the dungeon crawling, it had a solo mode. But I think a lot of the new stuff that Crazy Badger, Adams, Snarling Badger, thank you, Adams thing. I think they're starting to do a lot more solo rules too.
Space Station Zero was solo, and it was a lot like Rangers of Shadow Deep, and then Death Wizards has some solo play in it. If you want to play a solo RPG, I would look up my friend, the Basic Expert, who's over on Drive-Thru. He's got White Box, which is an homage to White Box Dungeons and Dragons. And he's got an Oracle set of rules to play solo with that. The new hotness, Shadow Dark. I've really been enjoying running that for my family and writing for it. Shadow Dark, you can go to Arcane Library, and I want to say her solo rules are free. So you can get the quick start set, which has a player's guide and a GM's guide with an adventure in it, and then pick up the solo rules. And the solo rules give you like an oracle that you can work. And an oracle is basically like questions that you can ask and then roll a d6 that help facilitate solo play. And I highly encourage solo play. I mean, the game demands to be played, and if you want to learn your rules better, solo play is great. I'm working on solo rules for mutants. I just haven't really decided on an AI string of intelligence yet. So not AI. I don't use AI in my books. I mean, like it's
automated.
What the game mechanic is that you're fighting against.
Well, it's almost like you have to delineate anymore, because it used to be just always called AI, right? Whereas now, I guess generative AI is probably the more modern one.
So.
GI. Hey. Not the kind your doctor talks about.
GAI. Gay eye?
No,
I don't know.
I've been studying for that test.
Oh, it's getting bad.
All right. So, any more questions? I'll take them all.
There might have been some.
By the way, somebody said that accounting and HR don't meet very often. I think you'd be surprised how often accounting has to go meet with HR.
Maybe. Well, I know Jeremy had one earlier about when do you know, because you are working on this stuff a lot. You're working on this while your hand is injured. Like, how do you know that you are getting burned out to the point where maybe your brain isn't going to be doing you any favors to continue developing? And do you know when that line is?
I don't know if I experienced burnout. I've always been very stubborn, but I also juggle a lot of irons. So like earlier, I was talking about the War Machine Heartbreaker. I've got the very first set of rules I ever wrote was the Evokers rules, and basically all of the chaff that I really wanted to work for Evokers that couldn't make its own game is really what became Mutants. So I'm always writing. I love writing. I love drawing. And because I like doing those things, if I ever am working on a drawing, like in my last book, From the Beyond, I was really stuck on a picture where I needed a zombie that existed in a one-way mirror to be able to like lift, choke an adventurer, right? And
Yeah.
it didn't matter what I did. I couldn't just put the image onto paper from my brain to be able to draw it. So then I put it down and I started just working on commissions. I took on a couple of art commissions, and eventually I was like, Eureka, I got it. And then I came back to it and I was able to finish up that drawing.
I mean, that's a very common art thing in general. Like, it's really recommended that after working on something for a while, you step back and give it a bit and then come back and look at it with fresh eyes, because there's a lot that you'll miss if you're hyper focused.
Yeah.
Screenplay writing is actually similar in that respect, in that even once you finish it, you're actually suggested to put it in a drawer and come back 2 years later, because you'll read it and be like, oh,
You
That's
see
a
all
really
the
long
holes.
turnaround time.
That
Yeah.
is.
I mean, if you're able to,
Right.
But, I know. I think Stephen King actually does that with his stuff a lot of times too.
Okay. Yeah. His brain overheated and burned all his hair off. Oh, that's what happened to you.
Yeah. But yeah, no, I try not to experience burnout, and I really try not to sell people on that idea. And I know that everyone treads water differently.
Yeah.
So your mileage is going to vary, but I highly encourage you, because I think what happens is people will get into the trap of saying, well, I'm just experiencing a little burnout, I'll get back to it. And
You
then
don't.
6 months later, you still haven't written that adventure that you played with your friends that you really want to share with everybody. Or, like, I think one of the funnier comics I saw today was a trick-or-treater dressed up as a book, and she's looking at this lady like, I'm that book you've been meaning to write. Don't sell yourself on this idea that you can only do. I'm going to shoot myself in the foot. Don't sell yourself on this idea that you can only do so much, because the odds are you can do a lot more. You can't do everything, but the odds are you could do a lot more. And then you've just got that super id in the back of your brain saying, this is too hard. You need to stop doing it because we don't like the resistance. You really need to tame that beast and do it. And if I can be any testament to that, like I said, I've been really fortunate since I sat down and had built up the confidence, and having friends like you guys and Brewski in the chat, and there's a couple other people in the chat that are really supportive of me. Finding those people that will give you trustworthy feedback and your confidence boost to just take those first couple of steps, and then when you do that, then it's just don't rest on your laurels. You can always improve.
I agree. It's almost like, I mean, we were talking a little bit about the concept of being anti-fragile, I think, before the stream started. When you are working out and you're doing exercise, or especially if you're trying to like do resistance training and weight training, there's certain, I've always called them, like, I guess, gates of sorts, where your muscles are like, no, I'm tired. And you have a choice in your brain. Like, do I rest now? Or if I hold out, am I actually fine? Because a lot of times you are, and you obviously got to not injure yourself and not like actually burn yourself out. But I do wonder if some of the telltales for that might only be shadows of a burnout rather than a real genuine burnout. And if you quit too early, then you have that 6-month delay type of thing you're talking about, and you find yourself never getting back to it.
Mm-hmm.
I could never take that long to delay anything unless I just never plan to get back to it. Like, the longer you step away from something, the harder it is to get back into something. So if you need to take like a day, take a day or something, but try not to take
put
long.
an end cap on it on the break. Yeah.
Well, there comes a point where when you come back to it, it almost seems foreign. You're like, what was I doing here?
I have no memory.
Any and all video games I've played.
Hunting was asking also about when I'll be playing Dark Tide again. I did play a bit over the weekend, so I guess we're gonna have to start streaming that voice.
Yeah,
it's working for Paul now, so we can have our 3-man team, and maybe I can get Aaron in there. And we can all just, bump our heads. I don't suppose you play Dark Tide, do you, Patty?
Oh man, no. I told Kitty maybe if I sell a couple of more books next year, I'll pick up a Steam Deck so that way I could play Dark Tide or Space Marine with you guys.
Dark Tide is so good.
But until then, I think people should enjoy their video games. But I get sucked. Like you were talking about Tears of the Kingdom. Man, that game suckered me in. Earlier this year, I got sucked in by Warframe because I hadn't played Warframe in like
oh my gosh, yeah, it's an older one.
7 or 8 years I haven't played that game, and I got sucked into it. And some of the other people I've been talking to were like, "Has anyone seen or heard from Patty?" And I was like, "Oh shoot, how many days has it been?"
Whoopsie.
Yep.
Yeah, that gets a little crazy. So burnout. I mean, you're the only judge that you have for that kind of thing. I don't think anyone else can really like identify that. Maybe, I don't know, has Kitty been able to kind of tell you when you're going too far, or are you generally the best judge of that for yourself?
Kitty will remind me if because we do a little bit of homesteading here, so there's a little bit of a honeydew list. This year was like rabbit hutches and moving those around. So eventually it got to the point I was like, hey, you need to stop working on your books and do this. I'm like, oh crap, you're right. It's summer. it's not winter anymore. I just need to finish this one last book. And oh wait, that's so Kitty's really good at that. But it's certainly never like a this has become unhealthy for you. Stop it. We haven't gotten there, and Lord willing, I won't. I mean, I don't think there's anything else in my life that's gotten to that point.
Awesome. I wonder if we should close it out on Flo's mini there. It's looking mighty. What is that, Flo?
What did we say his name is? Because I kept saying
not Angor.
Angor. Oh, I said Angor or something like that. What's his name?
Is that Angron?
Yeah, it's Angron.
Yes. Okay, I see.
I think Angnor was the word you decided. That was his name.
I was like, I know all of the letters are in there somewhere, but
when you buy your demon prince on Wish.
That's right.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, I'm just slapping on some paint right now.
He's not from the warp, he's from the rap.
Oh my goodness. Well, Patty, thank you so much for being on and joining us. And I guess we're just going to have you back because I think there's so much more we can discuss about game design, what might constitute like a perfect game, what are some of the best introductory games, how do you get somebody into gaming? Like, I feel like we only scratched the surface here.
I would love to come on, and I'm super grateful that you guys had me. Thank you.
Yeah, and then I'll see you next Sunday for our RPG.
Yes!
Which you are live streaming, right? Or no, are you streaming?
So right now we're just doing private links. If you want the private links, we do have an IKRPG Discord. We need to reorganize that because I put the links for us to sit in on the game in that chat versus like the watching chat. But if you do want the watching chat, I will give the links to Disembodied Voice and Miranda. So you guys, if you're in any of her communities, you'll get that private chat to watch it. And then once we get to the point where like we're really good with the rules and maybe it's a lot more polished, we'll start doing like open live streams. I think the only thing is, understand that we're not Matt Mercer. and we probably will not be engaging with the chat. Maybe save for a couple of days. Like if I decide to run something, maybe, and you guys want to play in it, then I will. We'll do some cool stuff with chat. You know, because I really like the idea of like using tabletop games as fundraisers. Maybe we could talk about that again sometime. But yeah, if you guys want the private link, and then eventually we'll open it up so that way everyone can watch. We just want to make sure that everything's looking smooth and running smooth before we do that.
That we've all like finished making our character sheet. Yeah.
I know, one jobber.
Alrighty. Well,
what are you talking? His character sheet's done. I'm not even going to level him up anymore. He's perfect the way he is.
He's Paragon.
I told you he's a Paragon character.
All right. Well, folks, we will be back in 2 weeks, and I'm very also excited about our next guest coming up in 2 weeks. So I'll be making that announcement soon. It might already be announced somewhere, but I'm going to double check that first. Which will be the 30th, the day before Halloween. So yes, I will be dressed up, and I hope you are too. And yeah, other than that, thank you all. We're going to be signing out here, so we can type in the comment section still to answer any questions while we have our little outro here. So thank you all again, and we'll see you hopefully in 2 weeks.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Barry, cover me.
All right, guys, this is it. Copy that. No more sandwiches, Barry. What's wrong with this place? I'm in the west corridor. I'm right outside the generator room. I'm out of bullets. Oh, Barry. Success.